When people talk about strange occurrences in Hollywood estates, they usually start with a rumor, a whispered sighting, or a story passed along by neighbors. This one begins with something far less dramatic, but far harder to dismiss: a utility bill. In early 2018, during probate of Larry Hagman's 43-acre ranch in the Ojai Valley, an estate archivist was tasked with cataloging records stored in a cedar chest found in the study. Most of it was routine repair invoices for the solar panels, receipts for tree trimming, even guest logs from charity events Hagman hosted in the 1990s. But inside a folder marked Utilities post-2012, there was a bill that didn't belong. It was dated October 2014, nearly 2 years after Hagman's death, when the property was supposed to be sealed and vacant. Yet the Southern California Edison statement recorded 3 unusual spikes in power consumption. 2:14 a.m. draw equivalent to switching on a small HVAC system. 3:47 a.m. another burst, lasting less than 6 minutes. 5:02 a.m. a third surge, almost identical to the first. The archivist, a man trained to make neat pencil notes in the margins, wrote simply strange. No caretaker logged this month. It should have been filed away as an accounting error. Instead, it became the first documented crack in the assumption that Hagman's estate had been sitting quietly, locked and lifeless, on the slope above the Ojai Valley. The ranch itself was famous in the area. Hagman had called it heaven. 43 acres of rolling hills, citrus groves, and eucalyptus stands, with a 20,000 square foot Spanish-style home at its center. Built in the late 1970s, the house had a wide arched entrance, terracotta tile roof, and panoramic windows looking out toward the Topatopa Mountains. What made it unique and what fascinated inspectors later was its infrastructure. Hagman had poured millions into making the ranch one of the largest privately owned solar-powered estates in California. Still, despite its eco-friendly veneer, the blueprints showed quirks. One stood out. Behind the main kitchen, tucked into the plans dated 1979, was a service corridor, narrow and windowless, running parallel to the pantry wall. Accessed only by a low door behind the shelving, it connected the kitchen to the den and utility rooms. Contractors who had worked there over the years often didn't even know it existed. The mysterious power surges logged in 2014 traced back to circuits that fed that very section of the house. Not long after the bill surfaced, attention turned to neighbors. On Meyer Road, houses are set far apart, but a few sit on ridgelines with a clear view of Hagman's property. One neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Dennis, recalled something peculiar. It was sometime in late 2015. About 3 in the morning, I took the dog out. From my angle, you could see right through Hagman's den windows. The chandelier was lit. Not dim, not flickering fully on. But I knew the place was locked up. There were no cars. It didn't make sense. I figured a caretaker must have stayed over, but when I asked later, I was told nobody had been there. His recollection lined up with the times marked on the 2014 bill. One document, one neighbor's memory, one architectural quirk. Each detail on its own could be explained away, but together they formed the outline of a question. If the ranch was dark, sealed, and uninhabited, what accounted for the sudden bursts of activity always in the small hours of the morning deep in the service corridor and the den? That was the moment when Hagman's Ojai Ranch stopped being just a famous actor's home and began to take on the weight of something stranger. A property with records that didn't add up. By late 2019, the estate had been on and off the market for years. Realtors spoke in cautious tones about its special character, but potential buyers always seemed to step back after touring it. Officially, the explanations were financial: the upkeep on 40-plus acres, the complexity of the solar infrastructure, the cost of modernizing a house built in the late 70s. Unofficially, whispers about the property's unease had started to spread around Ojai. It was during one of these failed sale attempts that the first systematic inspection of the strange electrical readings took place. A prospective buyer, a Los Angeles attorney with a taste for rural retreats, hired Valley Systems Home Inspection to comb through every inch of the house before he made an offer. Their technician, a man named Robert Hale, was thorough. He arrived just before dusk with a rolling toolkit, an infrared camera, and a digital meter designed to log fluctuations in the electrical system minute by minute. Walking through the ranch after years of only light caretaking was an experience unto itself. The main foyer smelled faintly of citrus oil and aged wood, with Hagman's original carved doors still intact. The den, where neighbors claimed to see light, was cavernous cathedral ceiling, heavy oak beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark groves. Dust softened the edges of furniture that had been left behind. A leather chair by the fireplace, a long dining table marked by faint rings where glasses had once been set down. But it was the service corridor that caught Hale's eye. On the blueprint it appeared as a utility run, only 3 feet wide. In person, it was a claustrophobic passage, painted dull white with a single bare bulb overhead. It connected the pantry to a low-maintenance hatch near the HVAC system. By all accounts, it should have been unremarkable, yet it was directly tied to the same breaker lines that had recorded those inexplicable nighttime spikes. Hale marked it in his logbook with an asterisk. Hale decided to return after dark. On October 17, 2019, his log shows he re-entered the property at 11:45 p.m. with permission from the estate handlers. He ran a baseline reading, 0.3 kilowatts, consistent with a sealed home. Then, at 2:16 a.m., the logbook notes something unusual. The chandelier in the den flickered on for exactly 14 seconds. What startled Hale was not just that it lit at all, it did so while the main breaker had been shut off. The surge registered as a short but measurable draw on his handheld meter. His infrared sweep, done seconds later, found no warm spots, no evidence of appliances or heaters. Hale wrote in his report possible backfeed? Could not replicate manually. Recommend circuit replacement. That wasn't the only account. Around the same time, the caretaker contracted to maintain the citrus trees. An older man named Luis filed invoices for repeated alarm resets. On 3 separate occasions in 2020, he reported the gate sensor triggering between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m. with no vehicles detected. Luis shrugged it off when asked directly, suggesting it might have been wind or small animals. Still, his invoices each carried the same note in block handwriting, reset, no cause found. 2 practical explanations circulated among those who studied the property. The first was electrical decay. Hagman's elaborate solar system, installed decades earlier, was notorious for glitches. When the panels fed into the old wiring, irregular surges could result. Engineers speculated that faulty relays could energize a line momentarily, producing the kind of short bursts Hale recorded. The second was unauthorized access. Though the property was technically sealed, more than a dozen contractors and estate staff had keys at different times. A late-night entry, a fridge plugged in, a heater switched on could explain some of the bills and surges. It would require only minutes of activity to leave a trace on the logs. Yet neither explanation fully addressed the chandelier incident. Light through the den's high windows while the breaker itself was off. During Hale's inspection, while crawling through the cramped service corridor, he found a wooden crate pushed against the wall. Dust suggested it hadn't been moved in years. Inside were household documents, Hagman's handwritten lists of solar panel inventories, sketches of expansion ideas for the ranch, and personal memos about maintenance. Most were mundane, but one page, folded neatly among the papers, carried only a floor plan sketch of the main house. The service corridor was outlined in red ink. Across the bottom margin, in Hagman's bold handwriting, were the words, "Keep this closed at night." There was no date, no context, and no further explanation. From then on, even the most practical observers found themselves pausing when walking that passage. Realtors admitted they kept the pantry door shut when showing the house. Contractors refused to leave tools in that section overnight. The explanation might have been as simple as poor wiring and drafty alarms, but the feeling around the corridor, and the cryptic note, kept the questions alive. And so, by 2021, the Ojai Ranch had become more than a celebrity estate awaiting a buyer. It was a place where ordinary evidence bills, inspection logs, neighbor remarks stacked into a story that still resisted a clean ending. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By the summer of 2021, the Hagman Ranch had shifted again in purpose. The estate had not sold outright, but rather been leased temporarily to a small production company out of Los Angeles that wanted to use the grounds for location scouting. Their plan was modest: a few weeks of photography, some on-site meetings with directors, and then a decision on whether to return for full filming. From the outside, it seemed like the sort of arrangement that would finally breathe normal life back into the place. For the first time in years, the gates on Meyer Road opened regularly, and vans came and went during daylight. Crews carried camera rigs across the long gravel driveway. Folding tables with paperwork and laptops were set up in the wide living room. But it was during those weeks of activity that more testimony emerged, in fragments and recollections, that added another layer to the estate's reputation. One of the location scouts, a woman named Renee, later spoke to a colleague about her impressions of the house. She was not superstitious by nature. Her career depended on walking through abandoned properties without pause, but her logbook for Ojai included a peculiar note: lighting inconsistent, den fixtures turned on independently of switches. When pressed, she explained that during a walkthrough at dusk, while two crew members were upstairs photographing the guest rooms, the chandelier in the den began to glow. She assumed someone had touched the wall plate, but when she reached for it, the switch was already in the off position. "I tried not to make a big deal out of it," she said in a later email. "We had a schedule to keep, and nobody wants to be the one to spook a director. But it stuck with me. It was that same chandelier neighbors had talked about, right? It didn't feel like a coincidence." Architectural obstacles. When contractors inspected the ranch for filming readiness, they stumbled over the same quirks noted years before. The service corridor, narrow and hard to maneuver in, complicated wiring checks. One electrician remarked in his report that he could not fully access certain junction boxes without removing shelving and old paneling. Even stranger were the blueprints. The production company had copies made from the county's planning office, and when laid beside Hagman's personal sketch found in the corridor box, the measurements aligned, but his annotated plan marked certain walls with faint dotted lines, as if he had considered false walls or hidden panels. None were documented in the county file. On the annotated page, the corridor was still outlined in red. Noise in the recordings. The production company never went forward with filming. The official reason, released in a short memo, was infrastructure concerns and logistical complications. But privately, one crew member admitted that there had been an audio issue during a test. A microphone left recording overnight in the den set up to capture ambient noise levels picked up irregular sounds between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. faint hums, like power briefly activating, followed by what the sound engineer described as a low scrape, as if wood against concrete. The file was checked against the house security logs. No entry had been recorded at those hours. The gates remained shut. The alarms stayed green. When the company left, they took their equipment, but the story of that unexplained audio traveled back into Ojai, where locals already traded half-joking tales about lights on at the Hagman place. Realtor's dilemma. For the realtors tasked with moving the property, these accounts became both a problem and a lure. On the one hand, whispers of unexplained events frightened off conservative buyers. On the other hand, certain prospects, Hollywood insiders, collectors, people with a taste for eccentric estates found themselves more intrigued than put off. By late 2022, open houses were held again, each tour carefully managed. Realtors avoided the service corridor altogether, keeping doors discreetly closed. The den chandelier was left disconnected, wires pulled from its mount, so that no accidental flicker would ruin a showing. Still, buyers who walked the grounds at twilight spoke of the house as unsettled. One prospective buyer, in a private remark, said, "The place is beautiful, no doubt, but something about the bones feels restless, like it doesn't want to be handled." Meanwhile, the locals of Ojai carried their own recollections. A former delivery driver remembered in 2016 approaching the front gate only to see it slide open by itself, despite no car approaching from inside. A groundskeeper's nephew, who had helped haul brush during a hot summer, recalled how tools left in the corridor overnight would be shifted by morning, leaning against different walls than they had been set. None of these claims were filed as official complaints or tied to formal reports. They lived instead in the atmosphere around Meyer Road, adding color to the estate's reputation, layer by layer. By the time 2023 arrived, the Hagman Ranch was no longer just a property with high upkeep. It had become something else, a piece of real estate that carried a reputation beyond its market value. Realtors could talk about acreage, solar grids, and panoramic mountain views. But in quiet tones, in side conversations, they admitted that what unsettled buyers wasn't the cost of the place. It was the sense that the house, and particularly that narrow corridor behind the kitchen, was carrying its own story forward, whether anyone wanted to listen or not. In early 2023, after years of hesitation and turnover, the ranch finally changed hands. A private buyer from Los Angeles, someone who wanted a retreat in the Ojai Valley, signed the escrow papers. Unlike the film company or the temporary tenants, this was a family willing to commit. They knew the estate's reputation. Of course, Ojai is not a large place, and rumors traveled easily, but they dismissed the stories as the kind of local folklore that inevitably builds around celebrity properties. Renovations began almost immediately. Crews arrived to restore the citrus groves, replace sections of the tile roof, and modernize the outdated solar infrastructure. With workers on site daily, the house looked alive again. The courtyard fountain, dry for years, splashed once more. Trucks came and went through the wide gates on Meyer Road. For a time, it seemed the property was moving forward. And yet, reports filtered out quietly among contractors. One electrician, assigned to rewire the service corridor, refused to continue after a week. He told his supervisor that tools he left neatly in a row one evening were found scattered across the floor the next morning. Another worker swore he heard footsteps in the den when he was alone on the property. But when he checked, the room was empty. These were not dramatic accounts, no apparitions, no cinematic shocks, but they were persistent, the kind of small, troubling irregularities that accumulate into unease. By midsummer, the new owners asked for certain areas of the house, the corridor and the den, in particular, to be sealed off until further notice. As the renovations slowed and the family settled in, the estate continued to carry its dual identity. A sunlit ranch above the Ojai Valley, and a property haunted not by specters but by records, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions. The tangible evidence is not easily dismissed. We have the 2014 power bill that showed inexplicable spikes during a time the house was unoccupied. Neighbor testimonies of lights visible in the den at hours when no caretakers were present. The inspector's log from 2019, where a chandelier lit despite the breaker being off. Audio recordings made by a production crew that captured unexplained noises during the small hours. Caretaker invoices consistently noting false alarms without cause. Hagman's handwritten sketch, the service corridor outlined in red, with the words, "Keep this closed at night." Each of these details is real enough. Bills, memos, remarks, and notes that can be touched, examined, and filed. There are rational explanations for many of them. The solar system, patched into older wiring, was known for irregular surges. Contractors with spare keys could have entered without logging their presence. A microphone left running overnight might capture rodents in the walls or pipes shifting with temperature changes. And yet, those explanations do not resolve everything. They do not explain why the chandelier could illuminate on a dead circuit, or why Hagman himself singled out the corridor with that cryptic warning. In the end, Larry Hagman's ranch at 1471 Meyer Road in Ojai, California remains a property suspended between certainty and speculation. What we can prove is straightforward: documented electrical faults, security inconsistencies, and the quirks of an aging, heavily customized house. What remains uncertain is whether those ordinary explanations are sufficient to account for the unease carried by the den, the corridor, and the late-night activity recorded long after the house should have been still. The story of the ranch, like so many places with long histories, does not end neatly. It continues as a mixture of paperwork, human testimony, and unanswered questions, just enough evidence to build a case, and just enough mystery to leave the final verdict unresolved. For those who now live at the ranch, the house is more than a set of walls and rooflines. It is a place that asks for a kind of quiet respect. The family has grown used to avoiding the service corridor, treating it as just another sealed-off utility space, no more accessible than an attic or basement. But in conversations with visitors, They admit that it feels different than other parts of the house, colder, heavier, as though the air itself carries weight. Local residents, too, continue to watch the property with a mix of admiration and caution. From the road, it looks serene. A white stucco estate perched above groves of orange and lemon, with the Tapatopa Mountains glowing red at sunset. But for those who have lived in Ojai long enough, it is impossible to see the lights of the den flicker on without remembering the stories of the bill, the inspections, and the sketch in Hagman's handwriting. The ranch has become a kind of paradox. In daylight, it is a showcase of Southern California beauty, a testament to Hagman's eccentric vision of living off the grid in his own slice of heaven. At night, it carries with it a different reputation, one that lingers in the gaps of invoices, blueprints, and recordings. And perhaps that is the final shape of the mystery. There is no photograph that captures it, no single document that proves it outright. Instead, it exists in layers. An unexplained surge here, a neighbor's quiet recollection there, a line of handwriting that no one can fully explain. Put together, those fragments resist closure. What we can prove is limited but real. Power spikes logged on paper, lights seen by neighbors, equipment that recorded irregular sounds. These are verifiable. What remains uncertain is harder to hold. Why Hagman himself warned against leaving a corridor open. Why the den chandelier responded when the breaker was cut. Why the property unsettles even practical observers. As with many estates tied to public figures, stories cling to the bones of the house long after the owner is gone. Larry Hagman's Ojai Ranch is no exception. It remains, even now, part home, part legend and address with evidence enough to demand explanation, and silence enough to suggest it will never fully give one. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.